to be a part of it and to create that change are ginormous. And it offers incredible career prospects going forward.
Hello, everyone. I am very excited to share this podcast episode with you today because it features our first guest that is located in Europe. I'm happy to introduce Seamus Higgins, a professor for the School of Chemical and Environmental Engineering at the University of Nottingham. He is currently a course director creating a new program in food process engineering. To make things or to make things better. That is what Seamus believes is the role of an engineer. Seamus has followed this philosophy as an engineer himself, and he is trying to pass it on, this philosophy, with his new course curriculum that not only provides students with the skills to take on the world, but also to inspire them. He also brings a passion for sustainability and innovative food manufacturing to shape the next generation of process engineers, which is really cool stuff, and I think that's something that we all need to hear. In this episode, we talked to Seamus about the food industry past, the present, and the future, and what is needed to re-engineer food systems to bring about beneficial change. Let's welcome Seamus Higgins to the podcast. Thank you so much, Seamus, for coming on the show. I was recommended you from our past guest, Con, and he spoke so highly about you. And I went and I dived into your videos online, and just hearing how passionate you are about food, it's going to be a treat conversation. So thanks for coming on the show.
Veronica, absolute pleasure, and great to be able to speak to food grads, both potential and those that are involved in the industry. With pleasure.
I love it. And I think the best place to get started is to just talk about food. I just mentioned how much you love food, but I know I have to give you the platform to talk about it. So I'll let you take it away.
Well, put it this way. Well, when we think of food, I mean, there are several words that help us to describe it. The taste, the experience, the feeling, or as a more recently creative food industry would say, a product that hits our so-called bliss point. I mean, food is one of the basic necessities of life, and it's also an integral part of our cultural identity. So it's actually a pleasure to be working in this industry. I mean, just think of it from a love perspective. I mean, from the time we're born, feeding a baby is one of the first acts of love a mother bestows on her child. Growing up as children, our food, nutritional intake, or lack thereof, has a lifelong impact on how we live, for better or for worse. So being part of this industry, I believe it's something that we can shout about.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's something that other industries, you can get into the automotive, you can get into electricity, but I mean, it's food. Food is something that everyone has some kind of memory to it, whether it be negative, whether it be positive. It's something that we need in our lives. And I agree. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And that's in part why we have this podcast, is to show about all the amazing people that work in food, because there's something for everyone in it. And food has history between whoever you talk to, the historical, and it's always ever changing. And to be able to be a part of the industry that's change, like as it changes, and to be part of that future, it's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, think about it. I mean, scientists tell us it's 3 million years since we kind of evolved to walk on two legs. Okay. And think of all of that evolution, all of that change. It has all been driven by one particular product or energy source, and that's food. It's dictated the way we live, from hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies to our industrial societies. It was the start of currency. It was the start of so many, many things. It's an integral part of our cultural identity. Think of our festivities. Think of all our celebrations. And think of any of them happening without food. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm already planning a party for the weekend. What's the most important thing you think about? The food, not where you're going to be. It's what food am I going to be having that weekend?
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, I definitely want to talk more about the history of food and talk about all those types of things, but I'm going to take it a step back just so our listeners have a little, who's this person that I'm talking with, and get a background about them. So would you be able to introduce yourself, and then we can bring it back into talking about food?
Sure, I'll try, Veronica. As you can see, I'm old and grey. I've been around. I've been around a long time. But from a career perspective, I've spent 35 years in the food industry. at various levels up along the line. And it was about 7 years ago. I seen an advertisement with the University of Nottingham, and they were looking for somebody with that kind of food experience to help create a new MSc program in food process engineering. So I thought, well, maybe it's time I settled down, and maybe it's time I kind of moved into academia. And that's what I've been. I've been here for the past 7 years as an associate professor for food process engineering. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it. Look, Nottingham has a great foundation when it comes to food. I mean, food has been part and parcel of us for over 100 years. We're a global top 100 university, and food research is an integral part of it. In fact, we've got one whole campus totally devoted to food and agriculture. It's even got a veterinary college. It's got 300 head of cattle.
Wow.
It grows all the different crops and everything. And we've just taken on a chap called Jack Bobo from the States. He's only been with us 6 months, and he's tasked with creating the new Food Systems Institute, which is going to help with policy development, with more research. So we're looking forward to some great things happening in Nottingham when it comes to food.
Wow, that's really wow. I'm jealous. I would love to have my campus to be have a whole food campus, but I'm in my own separate building, so I guess that's good enough for me. We don't even have a proper food science department where I am, so it's pretty. I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah. Well, look, I can kind of empathize a little bit with you there, because I am being food engineering as distinct to food science. I'm part of the it's the engineering college. I mean, we've got 5,000 students, undergrads and postgrads. And at my school is chemical and environmental engineering. I've been trying to get my HOD to actually change the name to chemical, environmental, and food, but he's saying it's covered, Seamus, in chemical and environmental. But within the faculty of engineering, and again, I find it's great because, from an environmental sustainability perspective, we've got several research academics, and they're looking at food, water, waste, bioenergy, biomaterials, all of those good things. And I think going forward, we'll come to it just now, but our food industry, there's no two ways about it, has to change direction from where it is at the moment. There are several aspects of it from an environmental sustainability perspective that has to change. And I think that's the exciting bit going forward for new grads coming into the industry, because hopefully they can be instruments of that change. And I think with the technology and with the proficiency and a lot of the new stuff that's coming about, it's actually, trying to create a brighter future or a brighter going forward. And this is the beauty of the industry. It's not just for the food industry, it's for basically our whole world. I mean, we don't have a spare planet. And food production, the entire food system is all part and parcel of our sustainability going forward. It's an integral component of it. So yeah, I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here.
No, it's okay. As you were speaking about it, it just puts into light as about engineering. I think about chemical engineers, electrical engineers, and that whole ecosystem. But it's even been hard for me to put a finger on what a food engineer is, because I think about, is a food engineer someone who is a food scientist? Because I know that it gets overlapped, but then other times I'm like, is it someone who's just designing factories and engineering those? It's kind of a hard term to grasp for me, even despite being in it.
It's a good question. The one little bit I can add to it is we've been on the go for at least 2,000 years. Okay, it was a guy called Vitruvius in Roman times. He was an engineer, architect. And he invented the first undershot water wheel, which was the first food device, basically invented to work without animal or human labor. And of course, up to the Industrial Revolution, there were 20,000 mills in the UK alone. But I think from a food engineering perspective, and leading into your question, we might be good at engineering food production systems, but I don't think we're that good at the PR side. And I can explain that further because when Da Vinci immortalized Vitruvius in the 15th century with his famous portrait of Vitruvian man, which was the balance of architectural equality and all of that, he could have also celebrated as Vitruvius being the first food process engineer, because that's what he actually created. And I think today, from a food process engineering perspective, think of all the machines, it's the automation, think of how fast things run. I mean, I was with a placement student there last week up in Manchester. She's working for Procter & Gamble, and she's got the engineering responsibility on, believe it or not, a nappy line, a kid's nappy line. They're producing 1,300 nappies a minute. So just think of the intricacies, think of the machines, the glue machines, the feed arrangements, all of those things. That's part and parcel of engineering. And I mean, when you think of some of the industry today, think of a bottle of ketchup, it's inverted these days so that you don't see the vinegar separating from the top. So when it's inverted, it's much easier to process. But I mean, that bottle comes off the line at about 300 bottles a minute, right? So think of the filling side, think of the capping, think of the checks, the quality control, the weight control. Then think of onwards down the line where it's all collated. It's shrink wrapped, it's packaged, it's then put into a crate or some kind of box. And from there, it goes onto a pallet, and then it's finally loaded into a warehouse. And more, as automation comes into its own, all of these systems are all fully automated. And that's where engineering comes into its own with regards to basically making it work. I mean, my favorite definition for engineers is very simple. As engineers, we make things or we make things better. So if we can apply that to food and the food system going forward, and I often say, I do a lot of promotion actually around the globe for the university here. And, I normally start these points off with saying, the world needs more engineers, which we do. And that's not me saying that, that's UNESCO as well. And I think, as I say, the more we get into these food systems, we can have a chat later on Industry 4.0 and the opportunities that presents. Basically, yes, the food science is very much part of it, but food engineering, i.e. making it happen, is also an integral part of that equation.
How did you get into engineering? Were you always aware that you were going to go into the food engineering side, or was it something that happened naturally over time for you?
Interesting question, Veronica. I started out as an electrical engineer. And what drove me into that was I was mad into sound. I mean, there was the disco music of the 70s, and there was the sound and lights and that. So I said, right, I'm going to become an electrical engineer. And I started out on the technical side, actually served an apprenticeship. And then I ended up in a firm of consultants. I was on a board drawing for about 6 months. And I thought, no, there must be more to it than this. And I started working with, it's now called Tongaat, which is a Gaelic word, but it's the Agricultural Institute in Ireland. And that's kind of research into all kinds of agricultural produce and that kind of thing. I then got involved in my own business from a whole future going forward. It wasn't working out so well. So I said, right, I'm going to go international. And of course, when I went international, they looked at my CV and they said, you've been in food and agriculture. So that's where your future lies. And that's basically how I started. My first job was with Hewlett Sugar, one of the big, huge sugar manufacturers. And they were looking at building an animal feeds plant using the waste bagasse and the molasses. From there, I went into Nestle. I think I was 4 years in Nestle. I was 2IC. I was the electrical supervisor, but my boss he had the title engineering manager. He was 2 years older than me. And I reckon, well, the only way I'm ever going to get that title is moving on. So I did. And that was where I got very much involved in milling and baking. I started with Premier Foods, and I was with them for 10, 12 years. I had the title engineering manager. But then, just for food grads thinking about things going forward, unfortunately, economics plays a huge role, and particularly when it comes to capex and those kind of things. So, for want of a better word, one has to learn a little bit of Accountanese. Now, you could learn some of it, or you could go the whole hog, which is what I done, and I done an MBA in project management. And that kind of changed my perspective a little bit, understanding finance, understanding business. And I suppose if I have to look back on it, that was what kind of brought me into much senior positions, senior roles, a lot more responsibility, but a lot more oomph, shall we say, if that's the right word. It was just getting out there and making things happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. It's interesting how you fell into it, but now you're so passionate about it, and you're writing a book about the food industry. So it's funny how things change over time.
100%, Veronica. I mean, one of my favorite quotes goes back about 2,500 years ago. And let me get it right. That was written by a guy called Heraclitus. He was a Persian scholar, and he coined the phrase, the only constant is change. He viewed ever-present change as a fundamental essence of the universe. I mean, if you think about that, not just from an industry perspective, think about it from your own perspective, the way you have evolved, the way you have developed. But that doesn't stay static. You're constantly changing. And I think that's what's great about the potential going forward for food grads. Because the industry is kind of in this state of flux at the moment, and I say flux, that's kind of a subjective word. I mean, if I look at it in total, it's globally, it's a 12 trillion industry. It's growing at a CAGR, compound annual growth rate of roughly 5% per annum. If you're looking at it from a future careers perspective, it's the only industry I know that's guaranteed to grow for the next 25, 30 years with population growth. As we go from 8 billion to 10 billion, that raises problems with regards to feeding the world and everything else that goes with it, but it just guarantees the growth of the food industry going forward. I think the opportunities to be a part of it and to create that change are ginormous. And it offers incredible career prospects going forward.
And I think it's good that we are changing, because the system that we have right now isn't sustainable, and we don't want our system to stay like this. It's not sustainable. It's not going to feed everyone. We can do better. We can improve waste. We can improve how we use our resources. There's just so much to work at. And, like you said, our population's changing. And I think this is the perfect segue. Start talking about change, because you are so knowledgeable about the subject of food. And I'd love to talk a little bit about just how our food system has changed from what we started off with, from just regular farming within communities, to now, like you said, being able to create thousands of ketchup bottles per minute. So I'd love to just talk more about that. So I'll let you use that as a leverage point to talk a little bit about how our food system has changed over time.
Yeah, I think from a change perspective, there's the two elements, okay? There's our evolution, and there's also cultural change. And I think, okay, I mean, let's look at it from an evolution perspective. And I joke about it. I mean, the chances of Ed Sheeran, or what's the other guy's name? I don't know, who found a blue-eyed Galway girl a couple of years ago with their songs, couldn't have happened 6,000 years ago, because we all had brown eyes. it was it, it was a kind of a change in our evolution. One guy had blue eyes, and I look at other parts and parcels of that. Our milk, for argument's sake. I mean, 4,000 years ago, people couldn't drink raw animal milk. They were completely allergic to it. They couldn't take on basically, they were lactose intolerant. Again, it was an evolutionary change that enabled that, particularly with Northern Europeans, and that has spread over. I mean, that's how the milk and dairy industry happened. What we're seeing now in India and Eastern Asia, where people have been living with basically vegetarian food for years, they're going into an evolutionary change where their system is now able to absorb omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids without the need for AFS or animal foods. So that's evolutionary change. It happens over thousands of years. Culturally and cultural change, well, for want of a better word, that's on steroids. If you think of the way we've changed over the past 100 years, and things like food. I mean, well, I forget what the exact stats were. I think in the States, 100 years ago, 90% of the staple food of bread was manufactured in the home. It was only 20 years later when that was commercially produced, and 90% of it was commercially produced. And as things have come forward, we're looking at, well, there's been a whole drive by the industry with price, taste, and convenience. But if you think away that convenience has taken over, I mean, go back to the 50s when the first TV dinner was invented, and that was a frozen food, total convenience. They launched it unsure of what was happening. First year they sold 1 million, next year they sold 10 million. Okay, so it stopped people eating around the dining room table. But that was the change that's happened. And of course, over the past 30, 40 years, the whole debate around, is it fat or is it sugar, that's causing our whole, well, basically change in biology. And then there was the whole low-fat episode. So all of that was driving various elements of it to where we are today. And yeah, I mean, if we think of some of the environmental and sustainability concerns, I mean, we were talking about that earlier, but I mean, the more recent growth of the food industry not only coincides with that dramatic shift in consumer eating habits, but, well, think of the results of that. I mean, obesity levels in the UK and US have more than trebled in the past 30 years. The World Obesity Federation predicts that 1 billion people globally, including 1 in 5 women, 1 in 7 men, will be living with obesity by 2030. Okay, it's one element that we've got to look to change, because we simply can't afford that going forward from a health side of it. Similarly, the more recent changes, in food science, grocery retailing, and the use of lower cost calories and ultra processed fats and carbs, they've caused protein dilution in the food supply, which is also contributing to the same problem. So we have no choice. We've got to change direction for our food industry going forward. And I suppose that's really the challenge. Yeah, I mean, while the industry has had incredible success over the past 50 years in terms of scalability and offering abundant food supply to many parts of the world, it hasn't happened without consequence or controversy. And, obesity is one element. Environmental and sustainability concerns are the other one. I mean, if you think about it, when we think of our carbon emissions, we automatically think of energy and everything else. Our food system produces nearly 1/3 of total carbon emissions. If we think of our waterways, 70% of our natural water is used to produce food. If you think of, let's just have a look at these figures. the sustainability challenge going forward, how do we feed 10 billion people without using more land? I mean, we're currently using 50%. If we keep going the way we're going, we're going to look at chopping down a forest equivalent to twice the size of India to sustain it. But we've got to lower those emissions. And again, if we think about it from a cost perspective, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation puts a number on it. They're talking about roughly for every $1 we spend on food, the societal costs relating to that in terms of consumption and production is costing $2. So just common sense. It has literally got to change.
As we speak about all of these issues that are happening in these challenges, and I'm just thinking about from the engineering perspective, because we're talking a lot about the problems, but I always like to think about some of the solutions, and obviously we don't have them all, but when we're thinking about teaching future engineers to tackle these problems, what are the things that what should they be learning in order to help address these changes? Just like what kind of mix does an engineer need in order to start taking on these challenges when you might not have a solution in the end already in mind?
Okay, but look, that's a very good question, Veronica. And look, I think if I can try and address that two ways, okay? The first one is, well, I'll tell you what, let's have a look at it from a technology perspective, okay?
Okay.
And what we were talking about, or I'm not, we were talking about Industry 4.0, and we were kind of broached on earlier things in terms of automation. But with the drive and new technologies that are out there are huge possibilities for new food technologies. And you can look at this slide from plant-based foods, insect protein, cultured meat, personalized foods, gene-edited foods, novel food production. You're talking about digital twins, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, of course, obviously coming from the Internet of Things and the blockchain. I mean, Industry 4.0 is kind of a generic term for the way electronics and the whole computer industry has come. And, Industry 4.0 stands for fourth generation equipment. It's much faster than everything else. I mean, the classic example was, I remember automating a big plant. It was my first big process plant to fully automate in the late 80s, okay? I was automating that with an IBM PC, I think it was IBM 2, okay? In a nutshell, it had 640K RAM and 1 meg hard drive, okay? Now think about your cell phone currently. It's 128 gig. It's got 5G technology. In fact, it even supersedes Industry 4.0. And it's that rapid change in the technology that has allowed a lot of these things happen. I mean, they call it Moore's Law. Henry Moore, he was the founder of Intel, and he forecast in the late 60s that the amount of information that could be stored on a chip would double every second year. And that's what's happened. That's gone exponential. And if you think of a 1 terabit card, it can fit in the top of your finger, or it can slot into your cell phone now. But that information processing capability is lending to all kinds of things happening with automation, with machine development. And that's what's basically driving the whole Industry 4.0 process. As I said, we're on to Industry 5.0 now with some of the technology that's actually out there. When you think of things like blockchain, think of AI, artificial intelligence, all of them are again going to create new opportunities for the systems going forward. And again, I'm getting a bit carried away from an engineering perspective, but that's the exciting part of it. I think the other side of it, though, as well as the technology, I think from an engineering perspective, as much, well, look, the simplest thing is, and I mean, I often say it to my own students, I haven't got a clue what they're going to be working with in 20 years' time, right? And if I think of my own background, and I think of some of the stuff that I learned in the 70s and 80s. None of it applies anymore. Okay? So I think one of the key attributes, and I probably not just for engineering people, but for food science people as well, is learning how to manage that change. How to look at developing the hybrid skills. I mean, people often joke with engineers, we much prefer working with machines than dealing with people. But but of course, in today's world, you're talking about teams, working in teams. So managing people and managing with people is an integral component of it. And you're looking at possible tasks, or I won't even say tasks, but strategies that are basically unknown. You could be tasked with, right, we need to change our current manufacturing process and we needed to evolve to something new. You don't even know what that is. So learning team development skills and basically project management, managing through a structured work breakdown, focusing on results. I mean, you focus on what to achieve, not how to do it. That will evolve as you come forward. Yeah, I'm lecturing now, but trying to learn how to balance your objectives, achieving a balance, and that's a balance between what you can produce, your costs, your capex costs, your environmental sustainability aspects, your safety elements, your HACCP, all of those things. It's creating a balance to come up with a finished product. Because people are involved, it's negotiating that contract with people. All planning it's a process of negotiation. And the last bit I'd add to that is well, one, give and receive appropriate feedback. You're dealing with people. And then my last one will be adopt clear and simple management reporting structures. I call that KISS. And
Okay.
I often say to students, think of your first kiss. Everybody remembers the first kiss. Okay. Now I'm going to destroy that memory for you, and I'm going to create an acronym called KISS. And let's keep it short and simple. One of the inherent problems with engineers, and probably with scientists as well, is we get carried away with the technology, or we get carried away with the science. And we're saying, oh, if we can do this and we can stick in a bioreactor there and we take 2 pipes up here and everything else. Invariably, you're talking to people, maybe an accountant or maybe a business person who hasn't got a clue what you're talking about. Okay. So you've got to learn to be able to simplify that. And also in today's world, you've got to look at it from be able to relate that to costs, to capex and a whole lot of other things. So that's what I'm saying about hybrid skills. And I think from a career perspective, it's really worth concentrating on them. Who was it that said, your degree might get you the job, but it's the hybrid skills that's going to develop your career.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsors over at the Canadian Food Innovation Network. The Canadian Food Innovation Network's Food Innovation Career Hub is a one-stop shop for food professionals, students, and employers. The community is home to anyone who's interested in a career in food tech or is actively seeking talented employees for their food business. The Food Innovator Career Hub lets you search job openings, access original content, and connect with a growing community of food professionals and mentors. The Career Hub is open to any CFIN member. A CFIN membership is free and gives you access to funding opportunities, new partners, and it is the most active food business community in the country of Canada. Learn more about how you can get involved by scanning the QR code on the screen or checking out the show notes to this podcast. Let's get back into the episode.
I've heard that very much. And one of the things that you said that stood out to me was engineers need to focus on what they're trying to solve, not so much the how, just because it takes the way at least I interpreted it. And that's something I think when I am doing my work is that sometimes the how is really hard, but you do it one iteration per day and you get a little closer and you get a little closer and you're thinking about, I know I need to get it to this end point, but how do I make those changes? And so it reminds me of this saying where if you want to eat an elephant, how do you do it? Bite by bite. You have to take it in a slower amount.
Veronica, 100%. You know, it's kind of your mission. What do I really want to do here? And then your objectives. What are the key objectives that's going to enable me to do that? Then you start looking at your strategy. Then you start looking at your tasks. And that's the last part of it. The other little bit that I would like to throw in there is speak to experts, because there is no way under the wide earth that one could do or 3 years of graduate education, maybe a year or two of master's education, and then you come out with a piece of paper and you know it all. You don't. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you're only starting to learn when you actually get out there and experience a work situation. So never be afraid to talk to experts, or, you know, or if you don't understand things, ask the question. You know, there are so many, and all of us were probably all guilty of that. You know, from an engineering perspective, we've got our own language. From a science perspective, we've got our own language. But sometimes there's words in that you don't understand. I mean, the example I love to give was I was involved in working for a company called Miscan. And Miscan, they're Japanese, they're one of the biggest flavor houses in the world. But they took over the food interests of Premier Foods. And I was involved in that factory from a project management perspective. Anyway, I was there for about 2 months, and I was walking with the MD of the company down through the aisles, and he turns around and he says to me, Seamus, we need to look at this new TK line. So I'm kind of thinking, now, hold on, I've been in this industry for a long, long time. I kind of know most of my machinery. What is a TK line? I said, I haven't got a clue what a TK line is. Now, I didn't say that to him. What I did say was, excuse me, Joe, TK? And he started laughing. He turned around to me and he says, Seamus, how long have you been with us now? And I said, no, I've been with you 2 months. And he said, you do not know what TK, as in tomato ketchup, stands for?
Oh,
And I mean, that was the factory's largest output. They had about 3 or 4 big tomato ketchup lines. But again, the acronym threw me. So again, just a word of advice to students, never let it go. Always ask that question. And don't be afraid to ask the questions. But similarly with technology, you know, there are experts out there. You know, when it comes to milling, there's Bueller in Switzerland. There's also the Italians. You know, there's packaging lines that they have forgotten more than you know. So always go and ask them. Don't be afraid to say, look, this is what we're thinking. This is the concept. And before you get the specifications or whatever, go and talk to experts. It's always something that's worth doing.
I like that. It's always good to ask questions. It's always, you don't know, sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. And then you're trying to tackle a problem from, you don't have that expertise and you're thinking that this is the best way forward. But maybe if you'd asked more questions and learned more, you'd realize, oh, this was not the best way to go about it. Maybe I should do it like this.
Yeah. Or sometimes, you know, what's trying to be evolved or what's trying to be developed, you have some idea of it, but it might have been classified under a different terminology or a different name or whatever. So always ask questions and try and understand what the concepts are about. But again, that comes back to this work breakdown structure. And what I try and say is that from an engineering perspective, you know, if they're given a process to design, the first thing they'll probably do is they'll draw their block diagram, you know, which is a very general view of it. From there, they will go to their P and ID, which is process and ID. And it's only on the third stage they look at their P and PFD was the second one. P and ID is the third one, where you're actually looking at the control, the automation, and everything else. So you're using a work breakdown structure to actually get to the point where you've got a better idea and a better understanding of what's going on. So I think always apply that work breakdown structure. And what I was talking about earlier, you know, mission, objective, strategy, tasks, it's often referred to as a MOST analysis. always good practice to actually apply that to a process before you even start. So you're actually breaking down those key objectives to get to a end point.
And as you're speaking as well to the processes, and again, I'm looking at the screen and such, you mentioned speaking to experts, asking the questions, but I was wondering for you, which technologies are you actively trying to learn more about? Like, which ones are exciting you more about the future? Because I think that looking at this screen, it looks great with all these different topics, but it can be overwhelming to say I could apply all these different things to what I'm doing this process tomorrow. Like I'm trying to improve my canning line. Should I go for robotics? Well, likely you should.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of information. So how do you, I guess, learn, decide, and I'm getting ahead of myself here. I guess I wanted to know what is exciting you most about the industry and how someone can use that excitement to channel it into their work.
Okay, Veronica, that's a good question. You know what really the one technology that I'm fascinated with. In fact, my MSc students for the past 2 years are probably saying, yeah, we've had to do the whole process from beginning to end. But basically, okay, to kind of give you a kind of an overview on it, okay. 20, 30 years ago, if you'd have said to me that the UK could generate most of its electricity from air, I would have said you're mad. I wouldn't have believed you. Okay. Today, the UK grid is supplied by 35% wind generators. And by the year 2030, they say they can supply the whole grid with wind generators. Okay. Now, we were talking about food, environmental sustainability, and everything else. What if we could make food from air?
Okay.
Think about it.
That's kind of crazy.
Okay, now think about it. No land or animal resource. Okay, that plant could go into Iceland or it could go into the Sahara. It could go anywhere in the world. Okay, and here's the amazing part. It's actually consuming carbon dioxide as opposed to emitting it. Okay, now that plant has been in development for about 5 years. And 1 month ago, the plant actually started its first production line in Finland. It's called, the product is called Solein, and the company is called Solar Foods. And what they're doing is they're taking a single cell organism, it's called a hydrogenotrope, okay? And that goes into a bioreactor, and it's fed a combination of gases, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, a little bit of ammonia, and a couple of other things, which is its natural feed in kind of hot springs under the ocean or whatever. Okay, but this thing multiplies itself every 3 hours. Okay, and then the bioreactor grows it, and then we convert that into a finished product, high protein flour, all amino acids, 9% fiber. It's got 5 or 6% fat. Okay, it's absolutely an amazing product. And you know, for people listening in, they're saying, has he lost it?
Yeah, I mean, wow, okay. That's amazing.
The company's called Solar Foods. Okay, and if you look it up on the internet, food from air. Okay, but that's the exciting bit of technology going forward, and I think that's what's, well, for me, is really amazing. You know, if what we can talk about the food industry now kind of being, you know, it's creating carbon emissions, it's what do we do with land and mass and everything else. But again, I think with human ingenuity, technology, combining all those things, you know, we've got, if we can get it right, well, I'm not saying if we get it right, we have to get it right. But going forward, there's huge potential for it. But yeah, that's, you know, when you think of that kind of technology being available to us, it puts a much, what would you call it? Well, optimistic view of our future going forward.
Yeah, I think that there's I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but I know here in Canada there's a lot of this feel of dread. I know from a lot of younger individuals about what the future can be. And I know that at least here, I feel hopefully we can start to change the narrative as well because and start focusing on these potential solutions that we have. Because I liked, again, you just opened my mind to the fact I never even thought about creating food. Like it never even occurred to me to create food from air. So maybe if we start again with this vision that it will improve, we just have to know the how to get into that inspiration can really drive people forward, to drive people to make changes, to believe that it is possible. And once we believe that it's possible, then we can start making the changes because there's such a focus on just building up our systems to, make more, do more. But maybe if we just start shifting our thoughts to, make more, but better, more sustainably, and that if we can believe that we can do it, like you said, humans are very ingenious. Like they're able to, we've done crazy things that if you told someone even 10 years ago, 20, 30, like they would never imagine that it was possible. So if we can start believing that it's possible, I think that would be a good inspiration. And I think that's what more people need to be a little bit more optimistic, but also following that optimism with, we can do this. Because going with just false hope is not good. You need to put in the actions as well.
100%, Veronica. But honestly, I genuinely am quite optimistic about the future. And I think that's what really, for me, is very encouraging is this younger generation. I mean, I think I told you earlier, I do a lot of international recruitment for the university. And yeah, I've been to various countries. I've been to China, I've been to India and everything else. And of course, for a lot of students, it's very intimidating. I mean, you think of somebody living in China, they've just barely learned the language, and now they're meeting this professor from the University of Nottingham, and they're so kind of uptight and everything else. But, as I said, our school is chemical and environmental engineering, so they're the students I'm interviewing. And what fascinates me is right across the board, and it's not just in any one country, it's countries around the world. And I always ask the first question, why do you want to be a chemical engineer? Or why do you want to be an environmental engineer? Why do you want to be a food engineer? And what really gives me heart is I want to save the world.
Well, we're coming to the end of the show, and I think this is actually the perfect segue to let's add some more optimism and talk about advice. So, if I know we talked about a lot of different pieces throughout the show, but let's summarize it down to what advice would you give to young engineers and students who aspire to enter into the food industry?
I think there's incredible opportunities, and I think a lot of people think of the big companies. I mean, a lot of our students go into the bigger companies or the big food companies, so like the Nestle, Mondelez, et cetera, et cetera. But over the past 5 or 6 years, those companies have been growing at a rate of about 1.8%. Okay. The companies that are really seeing growth are companies that are looking at a much more personalized offering or a more specialized offering. And they're seeing growth rates of 10 and 15%. And I think longer term, that's the future, where you're looking at different, more personalized, instead of kind of building or making a global, simple branded product, you're looking at more personalized, okay, taking elements like, okay, maybe more fiber or okay, I don't want to say less fat because we all need fat.
Right.
We've lived 40 years trying to pretend we don't.
More nutritious, let's say, more full of what you need.
And those kind of things, personalized foods going forward. There's a big market, and they are the new companies going forward. So that will be one thing. The other thing I would say particularly to engineers and probably food scientists as well, is try to build your hybrid skills. Try to build your people relation skills, because not only will that help you in the interview, it will also help you when you start the job. I mean, just by the by, one of the things I love to do with my students, I don't know if anybody's done it, there's 8 billion of us out there, but we can all be more or less summarized in terms of 16 different personalities. It's always worthwhile from an engineering or a scientist perspective. The website's called 16personalities.com. Get in there, answer the 50 questions as quick as you can, and you will get a 3-page summary of your own personality and characteristic. And then remember that going forward when you're dealing with people, because at the end of the day, it's people that's going to make things happen. I think that's a very important part that, being honest with you, I think the educational system kind of puts to one side. I think there should be a lot more work on team development, people skills. It's a critical part of a future going forward.
I like that. I like that. I thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about. I've learned a lot in terms of the engineering side, about thinking about the future. And again, you put in more ideas into my head that I, can see possible, because sometimes I even need a dose of optimism when it comes to, because there's so much news about the focus on what's going wrong when I don't see as much of what's going right and like the potential. So it's good to have these conversations and, remind the listeners that things can get better, but you have to be the change to move them forward. So don't put yourself down, get those skills and just do more than what you think is possible.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm probably exaggerating a bit, but with the technology and the knowledge that's out there, most things are possible. So if you can kind of envision it or kind of think it, then start looking at, well, what are the key objectives you're going to need to make that happen? And yeah, it'll help build a brighter future for all of us.
I love that. And we'll finish it off with 2 questions. Now, I know that you're having a book coming out soon. Am I correct with that?
Yeah.
I'm trying to segue to help you.
No, Veronica, that's fine. I mean, in 5 or 6 months, if somebody's listened to this, they say, "Oh, I remember that guy talking about this." The book is called Food and Us Evolving, and basically, it's looking at our progression with food over the past 3 million years. And to a certain degree, over the past 50 years, the food industry, yes, it's created taste, price, and convenience, but our bodies are still locked in an evolution stage, in terms of our brain, our microbiome, all of the things that make us work. And it's not just in terms of energy, it's moods, it's thought processes, it's all of that is dependent on the food that we eat. So that's really the theme of the book. And it's looking at some of the stories going backwards. I mean, Vitruvius is one of them. As I said, he missed out on being called a food engineer. But there are amazing other stories with bread or pizza and all of the other things that we take for granted today. But also looking at what we know today about our DNA, about our microbiome, and about that wonderful little piece in the back of the brain that gives us that pleasure when we eat. It's called dopamine. So it's all of them combined. It's basically called Food and Us Evolving.
Amazing.
I'm hoping to get it out shortly.
Sorry to put you on the limb, put you out there with that, but I just wanted to make sure to promote it when it does come out, because I would love to read it myself. So hopefully the listeners will get a chance to. So we'll make sure to share that out when it does come out. So
that would be great, Veronica. I'll send you a copy the moment it's off the printing press.
Perfect. I would love that. So the last question I'm just going to ask you is, if people wanted to get in touch, where can people find you?
Veronica, look, it's our email is very simple. It's seamus.higgins@nottingham.ac.uk. But I can also hopefully now I've lost the buttons again. Get back into this. I find LinkedIn is a great way of communicating these days.
Perfect. Then I'll make sure to list that on the show notes to make it easier for everyone. And of course, we have your QR code on the screen, so I'll make sure to share that as well. So thanks for making it easy. And Thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation and sharing it with others.
No, Veronica, it's been a pleasure and great talking to you. And yeah, my favorite subject, food. And hopefully for a lot of other people as well going forward.
Thank you everyone for staying till the end here, and I hope that you are feeling inspired by this interview and you want to make a change. If you are looking for another inspiring podcast episode, then check out my interview with Francisco Pergola, co-founder and CEO of Chetty's. Francisco and his team show that you don't have to be an engineer to spark change. You just have to have the idea and the drive. As always, thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.